Unplugged in, the hunt for the leader of one of the world's most violent terror groups is over.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
Islamic State leader reportedly blew himself up after U.S. Special Forces raided his compound in northwestern Syria. U.S. President Donald Trump, who ordered the raid, said al-Baghdadi died like a coward. But is the world safer, as the president claims, or will his death inspire others? Plugged In looks at the daring mission to find the leader of ISIS and its impact on global security. On al-Baghdadi, a legacy of terror. Hello and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. 100% confidence? Jackpot? Over. Those were the words the United States Special Operations Commander in northwestern Syria used when he told President Trump that the world's most wanted man is dead. Al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the terrorist organization ISIS, blew himself up as U.S. forces stormed his compound. Al-Baghdadi's death comes just weeks after the CIA received a tip from one of Baghdadi's wives and a former courier. But this operation that resulted in his death of the brutal ISIS leader was just part of a larger mission, one that required careful coordination. It involved U.S. intelligence agency, U.S. Special Forces, and Kurdish allies on the ground. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb has the details.
This is all that's left of the Islamic State leader's hideout, reduced to rubble by U.S. air power. U.S. forces took Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's remains from a tunnel somewhere under this wreckage, confirming his ID through DNA testing before burying him at sea. And top Pentagon officials revealed Monday Baghdadi wasn't the only one taken.
There were two adult males taken off the objective, alive, and they're in our custody.
Officials are hopeful these men and the treasure trove of data collected from the compound will aid American forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces they're partnering with. Meantime, President Donald Trump has turned his focus to another asset, oil fields in northeast Syria.
But we're keeping the oil. Remember that. I've always said that. Keep the oil. We want to keep the oil. $45 million a month. Keep the oil.
Securing the oil fields is now part of America's mission, and Defense Secretary Mark Esper added U.S. forces would defend them from Russian and Syrian forces if necessary.
We want to make sure that SDF does have access to the resources in order to guard the prisons, in order to arm their own troops, in order to assist us with the defeat ISIS missions.
A convoy of U.S. troops left Syria days ago amid cheers and taunts. But a U.S. defense official tells VOA another convoy of American forces re-entered Syria Sunday to help resupply troops and prepare for the withdrawal that President Trump wants.
Putting more people in to protect these oil fields, are there going to be more troops now in Syria than there were before?
My expectation is that it'll be fewer than what we had before, and they will be going home.
But with forces flowing both in and out of Syria, it's unclear how long the withdrawal will take.
Joining us with more on the military and operational details, VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. She's live at the Pentagon. Carla, when did they first get a tip from either the courier or the wife?
Well, we don't have the exact timeline, Greta, but what we do know is it started with several pieces of the puzzle. So there was a courier involved, a wife involved, I've been told by some people. There was also the ultimate gold standard of intelligence, the mole that was able to infiltrate al-Baghdadi's compound. We've been told that mole was pretty upset with Islamic State and how they had treated his family, and so he was able to work with the Kurdish forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces to try to allow the United States to infiltrate the compound.
All right. This is a very risky mission. Did that mole, is the mole the one that provided them with information as to even the compound details about the compound so that they could effectively land there and storm the place?
That is what the Syrian Democratic Forces are saying. They said that he was able to get a layout of the compound. He was able to tell them where the tunnels were located. And so what we are hearing is that some officials were concerned that al-Baghdadi may move. And so they decided they needed to act quickly. And so we got some intelligence on Thursday. That's what Vice President Mike Pence had said. And then President Trump was presented options on Friday. He made the decision. They got actionable intelligence, I've been told, on Saturday morning, and they acted on Saturday night. They sent about 100 special forces in from Iraq into Syria. And let's not forget that this location in Syria, this isn't controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces. It isn't controlled by the U.S. air power. It's Russian forces overhead. It's controlled by a lot of Islamic groups that have been having that area, not Islamic State, but other jihadist groups. So it wasn't exactly the location that people would have expected to find al-Baghdadi, and that is why it was so dangerous, because they were having to go outside the wire.
Did Russia help or participate in any way, or give any guidance to the U.S.?
I'm being told that Russia was informed that they were going in. The president did thank Russia. He thanked Turkey. He thanked Syria. But it is my understanding that their only role was to make sure that there was no miscalculation, that forces just let them know that they were going to be in that area. They didn't tell them why they were going in, and then they came out very quickly.
How long had the military been preparing for this and running through drills for this?
Well, the U.S. military and other agencies had been looking for al-Baghdadi in earnest in Syria since 2015. So they had been partnering with Syrian Democratic Forces for years. And then they actually got this intelligence months ago, which, as I explained, was pieced together in the final days before it happened.
How were they able to verify that it was al-Baghdadi who was inside that compound?
Well, if you recall, Greta, al-Baghdadi was actually in a U.S. detention facility in Iraq years ago before he got released. So the understanding is that they had his DNA at that time. And what I have been told is that when he blew himself up, when he was in that tunnel hiding and he didn't have a way to get out, he blew himself up and the head was actually intact. So I've been told that the U.S. was able to quickly identify him by looking at him and by using biometrics, facial recognition. Then in addition to that, they used the DNA testing, and that was when they could confirm, and that is when the president went out and said that he was indeed dead.
In some ways, it mirrors the Osama bin Laden killing, because they were on the ground for a number of hours, about 2 hours. They collected data or information, and then they removed the body and buried at sea. Is that right?
That is what I've been told by officials. He was buried at sea. As with Muslim practice, you're supposed to bury the bodies within 24 hours. If you cannot do it on land, then you can dispose at sea. And that's also a good thing, I've been told, because that way shrines cannot be set up for these guys. These are terrorists to the United States, so they don't want to allow other people to be able to try to resurrect the remains or anything like that.
Any idea what actual intelligence was gathered on the ground while they were there for 2 hours that might aid future efforts to get terrorists?
Well, I'm hoping to learn more about that. We know that General McKenzie, who is the head of U.S. Central Command, is in the building today, and hopefully he will be able to provide us with some of those details. I have been told by officials that they had to act quickly. They had to get out as soon as possible. They collected all the data that they could, and then they evacuated and they destroyed the compound. They used smart bombs, guided bombs, to destroy the compound to make sure that anything that they left behind could not be used later.
That's Carla Babb, thank you, our VOA Pentagon correspondent. And you can follow her on Twitter at Carla Babb VOA. Speaking to reporters after announcing Baghdadi's death, President Trump praised the skill of U.S. military forces and their seamless coordination on what was a risky and highly complex operation.
The level of intelligence, the level of work was pretty amazing. When we landed with 8 helicopters, a large crew of brilliant fighters ran out of those helicopters and blew holes into the side of the building, not wanting to go through the main door because that was booby-trapped. A big part of the trip that was of great danger was it was approximately an hour and 10-minute flight, and we were flying over very, very dangerous territory.
Just how risky was this operation? What exactly did they know going in? And how much actionable intelligence can the United States learn about ISIS and its activities from what they discovered in the compound? VOA National Security Correspondent Jeff Selden has been looking into those questions and joins us. Nice to see you, Jeff.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so What did they get? What do we know that they got?
Well, the president has done the most talking about what material they've gotten, and so he talked about some materials about their future plans, some of their financial operations he alluded to. So if that is the case, then the intelligence community already has in their hands a good amount of material that they can start using to disrupt potentially future Islamic State operations, possibly in the West and in Europe. Now, remember, even though Islamic State, the caliphate, had fallen, it still was planning. U.S. intelligence officials, military officials have said for some time that it was just waiting for the right moment to be able to gather enough momentum to strike in the West. So that's going to be something they're looking at. They're also going to be looking at the finances. If there are any financial documents, how was the group using its money? And that's a key factor because even though, again, the caliphate was rolled back and Islamic State controls almost no territory at this point, it still had substantial financial resources. Recent intelligence reports indicate they may still have as much as $400 million at their disposal, which if you're an insurgency, which the group is right now, fighting both in Iraq and Syria, that's a lot of money that can do a lot of damage. They'll be looking at that. They'll also be looking at who Baghdadi was in contact with in his last days. We may have some indications of that already. There was a follow-on raid shortly after the raid that took out Baghdadi, and the U.S., along with the SDF, confirmed that they've now taken out the Islamic State spokesman, Abu Hassan al-Muhajir, and who was apparently coordinating some of the movement. So there's a lot that they can learn.
Where was that in relation to the raid on Baghdadi? Have they revealed where they got the spokesman?
They got the spokesman in a town called Jarablis, which is not far from the Turkish border. Again, it's in an area that the SDF and the U.S. has not controlled, has not done much fighting. As Carla mentioned earlier, it's airspace that's controlled by the Russians. On the ground, depending where you are, it's controlled either by Turkish forces, by Syrian regime forces, or if you're looking at Idlib province, where Baghdadi was killed, intelligence officials have called that a dumping ground for terror groups. So these are areas that are all controlled by various actors, and this seems to be where Islamic State was operating, possibly because the United States had less visibility into activity in this area.
Well, it somehow, resembles, what happened with Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, and we had assistance there by Dr. Al-Fridi, who is in custody in Pakistan. He was not released, but he tipped off the CIA to Osama bin Laden's identity. Here we have a courier and a wife who apparently were instrumental. Is there any indication what's going to become of the courier and the wife? Because I imagine they've got big targets on their backs.
Well, depending with the wife, depending how much information she's given over, the U.S. may try to hide her. Obviously, if you're a supporter of Islamic State, these people are now prime targets, people that you'd like to go after because they're traitors to the cause. There's been some talk that the operative who got inside Baghdadi's compound, close enough, according to the Syrian Democratic Forces, that he was able to steal the ISIS leader's underwear to help with DNA testing, that he may be in line for some of the $25 million reward that was put on Baghdadi for any information leading to his capture or death.
ISIS isn't the only terrorist group in the region, and oftentimes we hear at some point after these events that there's chatter on the internet from that there are other terrorist groups. Is there any information or any reason to believe that that this has accelerated the alert for the intelligence agencies about other terrorist activities?
Well, they're always looking at that. What most intelligence officials and analysts expect right now is that, at least for the short term, groups are going to be quiet, see how it plays out. There has been some chatter on social media from groups like al-Qaeda celebrating Baghdadi's death and voicing hope.
Celebrating him.
Well, he was an adversary, and it's a complicated relationship, to be sure. While celebrating Baghdadi's death and saying, see, this shows that you were wrong, some of the messages that al-Qaeda sympathizers and supporters and clerics have been putting out is expressing hope that perhaps the Islamic State adherents, supporters will repent and join al-Qaeda's cause. So they're going to be looking at whether or not al-Qaeda, other groups are going to try to poach some of the provinces, some of the affiliates that Islamic State had. And they're also looking at what Islamic State is going to do. Islamic State, from what we've been able to gather from what officials have said publicly, was savvy. They weren't using cell phones. They were using methods that were making it hard for the U.S. to pick up some communications, although the U.S. using advanced technology was able to figure out what they're doing. This is going to cause a group like ISIS or any other savvy terrorist group to look at what they were doing, and they're going to start changing how they operate already to make sure that more airstrikes and more raids don't take out other leaders. And already the SDF was saying that they were hurrying up some operations. And in addition to the strikes on Baghdadi, the raid that took out the ISIS spokesman, the SDF has said there were 2 other raids, another in the town of Jarablus, near the border between Syria and Turkey, and then one in the town of Afrin. We've yet to get more details on what those raids turned up.
Jeff, thank you. Jeff Selden, our national security correspondent here at VOA. And you can follow Jeff on Twitter at @JSelden. Baghdadi is a case study for intelligence agencies. Plugged In's Mil Arcega takes a look back at Baghdadi's past and how he evolved to become one of the most ruthless terrorists in the world.
The ISIS leader had been in hiding since the collapse of his so-called Islamic Caliphate in March 2019. He was born in 1971 in the city of Samarra, Iraq, 125 kilometers north of Baghdad. According to Reuters, his real name was Ibrahim al-Samarra'i. He studied at the Saddam University for Islamic Studies in Baghdad, joining the Muslim Brotherhood after graduating. When the United States invaded Iraq in March 2003, Baghdadi joined forces with Sunni militias to fight the Americans. He was arrested and captured by U.S. forces in 2004 and remained in prison until 2009. While there, Baghdadi made connections with other extremists who shared his views. After his release, he sought out his former inmates, and together they formed the Islamic State in Iraq, an al-Qaeda affiliate, which at the time was led by Abu Omar al-Baghdadi. After Omar al-Baghdadi's death in 2010 in a joint U.S.-Iraqi operation, the younger Samarra'i took on the elder's name, becoming the group's new leader. Now Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he saw an opportunity to expand in 2011 when civil war broke out in Syria. In 2014, after committing a series of brutal acts, al-Baghdadi declared the formation of a vast Islamic caliphate over parts of Syria and Iraq. Since 2016 until his death in 2019, the United States has had a $25 million bounty on Baghdadi's head. For Plugged In, Mil Arcega, VOA News.
One thing is certain, Baghdadi's death is not the end of ISIS, but his death is a blow to ISIS. For more on what might be next, we are joined by Hasib Alakozai, managing editor of VOA's Extremism Watch Desk. Hasib, before we even get to what this means to ISIS, this was a vicious man, beheading, raping, burning people alive. It's just about as vicious a person you can imagine.
He was a vicious person, and he was that vicious that even Al-Qaeda condemned him. So think about the viciousness. Al-Qaeda in itself is a terrorist organization, and when his organization parted ways with Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda was like, you are a heretic and you are no longer part of the Al-Qaeda. So his level of viciousness was at that level that even Al-Qaeda condemned him.
It's just, there was just so many, even Americans, in fact, I spent time with James Foley's parents after he was beheaded, a journalist, and it's almost hard to believe anyone could be that inhuman as Baghdadi. But anyway, all right, now turning to the question of the future. They've lost their land. ISIS has lost its land. They've now lost their leader and perhaps number 2, the spokesperson. So, and there are other terrorist groups out there. What becomes of the ISIS followers?
Currently, there are 15,000 to 18,000 ISIS fighters in Iraq and Syria. 3,000 of them are foreign fighters. So while the physical caliphate may be gone, the leadership may be gone, the virtual caliphate, remember the Islamic State has been emphasizing on lone wolf attacks, on attacks through the internet. They're trying to inspire, motivate people elsewhere around the world to motivate attacks. So the virtual caliphate, the ideology is still there. And what is important to point out is the conditions, the environment under which the Islamic State emerged and flourished is still there. You have sectarianism in the region, you have poverty in the region, you have all sorts of insecurity in the region, you have failing states. These factors, in the beginning contributed to the emergence and strengthening of the Islamic State. So these factors are already there.
I suppose you also have to fold into it that now with Turkey and the Kurds fighting in that corridor is that we're hearing reports that the Kurds who held some of the ISIS fighters imprisoned, that some of them have been released, which may, of course, only add fuel to the fire.
It certainly will. Not only that issue is of concern, you have several camps that have inmates, dangerous ICE inmates. The province where Islamic State leader was found and killed, Idlib, is home to tens of thousands of Islamic State fighters, al-Qaeda fighters, and a bunch of other designated groups that have fighters. And the U.S. has long voiced concerns over the presence of these fighters there. But the problem there is you have 3 million people as well. Should there be a military strike on Idlib, which eventually that will come, either by the U.S. or by Russia or a combination of both, or by Turkey, or there will be a coalition, or we're looking at a mass exodus of people, because one of the reasons why the U.S. has not actually went ahead with the operation is the concern that it's going to lead to displacement of millions of people that are currently living in that province.
Are these terrorist groups growing? I mean, it seems like, from afar, as you look at it, when they start losing their leadership, lose their land, and you hear, less terrorist attack, you wonder if, maybe, these groups are not growing, but that they're having trouble trying to achieve their vicious goals.
The ideology is still there, and it will continue to be there so long as the conditions that nurture them, that allow them to flourish, are there. But there would certainly be power struggle with al-Baghdadi being taken out, his deputy was being taken out, and a number of airstrikes and drone strikes have been carried out in recent months in coordination with local allies that have really undermined the leadership of the organization. So there will be, in the short term, there will be power struggle. But as far as the impact of this strike on the overall organization of Islamic State is concerned, and other terror group is concerned, they're pretty decentralized. They have tried to become decentralized and move from a centralized form of organization. That way, even if the leadership is gone, they can still thrive and they can still continue.
Well, it doesn't appear that it's very safe to be a terrorist these days, because but on the other hand, if being a martyr is something to be achieved, something they want, it's a very difficult enemy if there's no sense of survival.
Yeah, and remember, these organizations are formed with the assumption that one day its leader is going to be gone. Because,
as a hero and as a martyr.
Yeah. But
not as a victim, but as a hero and a martyr.
Yeah, and sometimes they will celebrate it because martyrdom is what they're aspiring for.
And that makes it extraordinarily difficult. Well, needless to say, it's good news that this terrorist has now been eliminated.
It absolutely is.
Hasib, thank you.
Thank you.
Hasib Al-Kozai, Managing Editor of VOA's Extremism Watch Desk. Thank you very much. And of course, you can follow Hasib on Twitter at ALIKOZAI86. Baghdadi has been responsible for unthinkable death and destruction. He inflicted vicious terror, raping and killing hostages himself, and also inspiring others to likewise brutally torture and kill, all in the name of ISIS. Easter Sunday, 2019, at least 290 people were killed and hundreds more were injured in a series of bombings in Sri Lanka. ISIS claimed responsibility for the multiple suicide bombings at hotels and churches holding Easter services. December 19, 2016, 12 people were killed, more than 50 others were hurt when a tractor-trailer barreled through a Christmas market in Germany. Again, ISIS claimed responsibility. Americans have also been targeted and killed during Baghdadi's reign of terror, some in bombings and lone wolf attacks. Others were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. James Foley, Stephen Sotloff, Peter Kassig, and Kayla Mueller. When asked how she felt about Baghdadi's death, the mother of James Foley put it bluntly.
This will be a blow to them, but we've got to be ready for retaliation.
According to our next guest, the next 6 months will be critical in the war on terror, and that's because even without its leader, the idea of the Islamic State remains a clear and present danger to free societies around the world. Retired Army General Bob Scales is a former commandant of the U.S. Army War College, and we are very happy to have him back here on Plugged In. Nice to see you, General.
Hi, Greta.
General, how risky was this operation?
This was an extraordinary operation. I think that the media has sort of sold it a little short because you don't have time to to lay out the complexity of this, real quick, the Cliff Notes. 700-kilometer round trip with 2 refuelings in the air from C-130 aircraft. So you have helicopters flying at 50 feet to 100 feet.
That's low.
Low, being refueled at night from C-130 fixed-wing aircraft. Then they had to surround the compound and do it, obviously, with surprise, because had this thing been triggered in any way, many of those Rangers would have been killed. Blow a hole in the wall and then take down Baghdadi very, very quickly. In fact, in less than a minute to take him down, so his supporters and his guards and his armed thugs who patrolled that compound wouldn't have taken him out. An extraordinary effort. But it's important to realize, as we say in counterterrorism, operations like this are 90% intelligence and 10% direct action. So it's like a duck in water. You know, the intelligence feet are moving at an incredible rate, and any single flaw in that quality of intelligence could have turned this into a disaster.
And the president and whoever else is in the Situation Room, they can actually watch this in real time?
Yeah, I've done this myself when I was in the theater. The feeds are normally done by infrared. There's several high-flying drones overhead, so they can't hear the drones on the ground. And you can, it's like literally watching a movie, a video movie. You can see the soldiers moving about. You can see the explosions. You can see the tracers of the bullets flying around. It's incredibly dramatic. And I've been told that pretty soon an edited version of this will be coming out so the public can see it.
How different, that kind of fighting from even your experience in Vietnam?
It's enormously different. The one thing is the quality. My soldiers were great in Vietnam, but these guys are playing a game at the postgraduate level. I remember General Mattis once said to me, we were talking about
former Secretary of Defense.
Former Secretary of Defense was telling. He said, "I wish we could bottle this." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I wish we could take the skills that we see in these operations and bottle it so you could pop the top on the bottle and use it at a moment's notice, and take those skills and spread them throughout the force." Because we're the only military in the world today who could do this. The Russians can't, the French, Germans, British. We're the only ones who could pull this off.
Why can't they do it?
They don't have the equipment. They don't have the training.
Well, we seem to sell everything all around the world.
Yeah, but not that stuff.
We don't sell that stuff?
We don't sell that stuff. And the other thing is the, I have to say, the culture. Over the last 50 years, the American military, the Army and Marines in particular, have built a culture of direct action where these soldiers, particularly Delta Force, are selected with an incredibly difficult process. In fact, sometimes they'll take, out of 200 people who apply for Delta, they'll take 1 or 2. That's how selective Delta is. And they stay in these units sometimes for 10, 15 years. That's how good they get. The average age of a Delta fighter, believe it or not, is 35.
Oh, it's old.
These are long service professionals.
The president was criticized by many, including members of his own party, for taking the troops out of that corridor where we're fighting and working with the Kurds. I wondered this, though. I'm trying to look at it from all different ways. Do you think that taking those American fighters out might have had some impact, whether intended or not, to tell Baghdadi he can take down his defenses because the Americans are leaving? Nope,
I don't think so. In fact, terrorist groups are always on the move. They have disassociated themselves from controlling terrain. They're very ephemeral. And I don't think until last week they were particularly concerned about having 8 American helicopters drop into their compound. But we have created a void. There's no doubt about it.
So you do advocate? So you are against the American troops leaving there?
Well, first of all, the American troops haven't left.
Some have.
Some have,
but
what they've left in place is that intelligence infrastructure that I mentioned to you earlier. If you don't have that, you're not going to be able to do. We won't be able to do this again. And we have to mend our relationships with the SDF. The Kurds were absolutely critical in this takedown.
And of course, we know it'd be interesting to see. I hope that we take care of the courier and the wife who gave us the tips.
Oh, absolutely.
We left Dr. Afridi behind, I think, in Pakistan, who helped us with Osama bin Laden. But anyway, maybe we'll help him sometime. Anyway, General Scales, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you, Greta.
Thank you very much, General Scales, the U.S. Army War College. And that's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice of America. And you can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta. And do follow me on Twitter at Greta. Thank you for being plugged in.